Hi, I'm Elise. The night my parents told me I wasn't welcome at our family dinner was the same night I drove away in my brand new Lamborghini Huracan. They said I embarrassed them, said I was a disappointment, said I had no future. And the way they signaled for the check when I mentioned my dreams, it was like they were erasing me from their legacy forever. But what they didn't know was that before the night even ended, I'd be parking a car worth more than their house right in front of that restaurant window. You think that's the wildest part? It's not, because what happened next exposed 3 generations of family secrets and lies. What would you have done in my place? Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from? And who in your life has ever dismissed your potential? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The clink of expensive silverware against porcelain plates filled the private dining room of Bellissimo, downtown Chicago's most exclusive Italian restaurant. Golden pendant lights cast a warm glow over white tablecloths and crystal glasses, but nothing could warm the chill in my parents' eyes as I slid into the seat across from them. 10 minutes late, an unforgivable sin in the Chen family rulebook. Traffic was terrible coming from the office, I offered, unfolding the crisp napkin and placing it across my lap. My father didn't look up from his menu, his reading glasses, perched on the bridge of his nose like a judge about to deliver a sentence. My mother's smile was tight, practiced, the same one she used for difficult clients at her law firm. "We already ordered appetizers," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointment wrapped in politeness. "Since we weren't sure when you'd arrive." I nodded, swallowing the explanation that my boss had kept me late reviewing. The marketing proposal I'd spent 3 weeks perfecting. In the Chen family hierarchy, excuses were for the weak. Results were all that mattered. My sister Vivian sat beside her husband Derek, both of them dressed impeccably. Her in a designer dress I recognized from the spread in Vogue, him in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Their matching wedding bands gleamed under the restaurant lights, a constant reminder of the path I was supposed to have taken but hadn't. "You look comfortable," Vivian said, eyeing my blazer and jeans. The blazer was my nicest one, paired with my only decent blouse, but next to her Chanel, it might as well have been a paper bag. "Some of us work in creative fields," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. "Tech startups don't really do formal dress codes." My father scoffed quietly, finally looking up from his menu. "Is that what we're calling it now? A creative field? Last I checked, you're just managing social media accounts for companies that will probably fold within a year." The waiter arrived with bruschetta and calamari, providing a momentary reprieve from the tension. I reached for a piece of bruschetta, only to have my mother slide the plate toward Vivian first. "Vivian and Derek have some news," she announced, her eyes lighting up in a way they never did when I spoke. "Don't you, dear?" My sister straightened, her hand automatically finding her husband's. "We closed on the lake house in Lake Geneva yesterday, the one next door to the Wilsons," she beamed, "and we're thinking of starting renovations next month so it'll be ready for summer." My parents erupted in congratulations. My father raised his wine glass. "To making smart investments and building a future. This is what happens when you follow the right path." The emphasis on right wasn't subtle. Neither was the sideways glance in my direction. "That's great, Viv," I said, meaning it despite the sting. "The one with the private dock?" She nodded, launching into details about square footage and property, values that made my father lean forward with interest. I picked at my calamari, calculating how many months of my salary would equal just the down payment on a vacation home like that. The main courses arrived: filet mignon for my father, sea bass for my mother, matching lobster ravioli for Vivian and Derek. My mushroom risotto seemed plain in comparison, but it was all I could justify on my budget. I'd been saving every penny for something they couldn't possibly understand. "So, Elise," Derek said during a lull, his tone carrying that forced interest people use when they feel obligated to include you. "Still at that little marketing company? What's it called again?" "Pixel Push," I said. "And actually, I've been working on something of my own." The table went quiet. This was new territory. In the Chen family narrative, I was the underachiever, the creative but impractical daughter who couldn't commit to law school or medical school or any of the acceptable paths laid out for me. "I've been developing an app," I continued, the words rushing out before I could lose my nerve. "It's a platform that connects creative freelancers with businesses needing specific creative services: designers, writers, photographers, videographers. I've been coding it myself for the past year, and I just secured first-round funding last week." My mother's fork paused midway to her mouth. "Funding? What does that mean exactly?" "It means investors believe in my idea enough to put money behind it," I said, allowing a small note of pride to enter my voice. "Actually, it's significant funding. 7 figures. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's expression darkened, not with the pride I'd foolishly hoped for, but with suspicion. "Who would invest that kind of money in an unproven concept?" he asked. "Especially with someone who has no business experience?" "I have 4 years of marketing experience," I countered. "And, before that, my computer science degree." "The degree you never used," my mother interjected. "Until now, apparently." "I've been using it, just not in the way you wanted me to." Vivian sipped her wine, watching the exchange like it was a tennis match. Derek's eyes were fixed on his phone under the table, already bored with the conversation. "Well," my father said finally, "I hope you've consulted with proper legal counsel. These so-called investors often take advantage of young people with little business acumen. They'll own your idea and leave you with nothing." The dismissal in his voice was so familiar it almost didn't hurt. Almost. "Actually, I retained Goldstein and Powell for the contract negotiations," I said, naming one of Chicago's top business law firms. "And I maintain majority ownership and creative control." My mother's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of the prestigious firm. "How can you afford Goldstein and Powell?" "Because my app prototype won the Midwest Innovation Challenge last year," I said quietly. "The prize included legal services. I never mentioned it because, well, no one ever asked what I was working on." Another silence fell, heavier this time. My father cleared his throat. "Well, these app things are a dime a dozen. Most fail within the first year." "Robert," my mother chided softly, though whether she was objecting to his pessimism or his dismissal of my achievement wasn't clear. "It's fine," I said, setting down my fork. "I know the statistics. I've done my research. That's why I've spent the last 3 years building a network of creative professionals who are already committed to the platform. We launch next month." "3 years?" Vivian asked, her voice tinged with genuine surprise. "You've been working on this for 3 years and never said anything?" I met her eyes. Would anyone have listened? The uncomfortable truth hung in the air. In our family, my initiatives were treated as passing fancies, my determination as stubborn impracticality. I'd stopped sharing my dreams years ago when I realized they were seen as childish fantasies rather than genuine aspirations. My father signaled for the waiter. "More wine, please, and perhaps the dessert menu." I took a deep breath. "Actually, there's one more thing. With the funding secured, I've made a personal investment, something to celebrate this milestone." My mother's expression softened slightly, perhaps thinking I'd finally done something sensible like purchase a condo or invest in stocks. "Oh? What kind of investment?" "I bought a car," I said simply. It gets delivered tonight. Derek looked up from his phone, suddenly interested. What kind of car? Please tell me you didn't overpay for a new Accord or something. Not exactly, I said, a small smile playing at my lips. It's a Lamborghini Huracan. The reaction was immediate and exactly as I'd expected. My father's face flushed dark red. My mother's hand flew to her pearl necklace. Vivian choked on her wine. That's not funny, Elise, my father said, his voice dangerously low. I'm not joking. This is exactly the kind of irresponsible behavior that— That what, Dad? I interrupted, my voice steady despite my racing heart. That proves I don't know what I'm doing? That I'm the family disappointment? The creative but impractical daughter who will never measure up? We never said that, my mother protested weakly. You didn't have to say it. Every dismissed accomplishment, every comparison to Vivian, every change of subject when I talk about my work. It all says the same thing. I don't fit the Chen family mold, so I must be defective. My father's jaw clenched. If you've actually done something as foolish as spending millions on a sports car when you can barely afford rent, then yes, you are proving our point spectacularly. I can afford rent just fine, I replied. And the car, and a lot more. With borrowed investor money? He demanded. Do you understand how financing works? How debt works? The condescension in his voice was the final straw. Years of being overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed culminated in this moment. I placed my napkin on the table and stood up. I understand exactly how it works, I said. I also understand that nothing I ever do will be good enough for this family. So I'm done trying. My mother reached for my arm. Elise, don't be dramatic. Sit down and let's discuss this rationally. I gently removed her hand. There's nothing to discuss. For once in my life, I'm doing exactly what I want, and I'm succeeding beyond what any of you thought possible. And none of you can stand it. If you walk out that door, my father said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet I remembered from childhood, don't expect to be welcomed back until you've come to your senses. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw for the first time not the towering figure of my childhood, but a man terrified of anything outside his narrow definition of success. I've never been more sensible in my life, I replied. Goodbye, Dad, Mom. Congratulations on the lake house, Vivian. I walked out of the private dining room, through the main restaurant, and into the cool Chicago night. My hands were shaking, but my steps were steady. The maitre d' called after me, something about the bill, but I kept walking. Outside, the valet was just helping an older couple into their Mercedes. And there, gleaming under the streetlights like a vision from another world, was a matte black Lamborghini Huracan, its angular lines and aggressive stance making it look like it was moving even while standing still. A man in a suit stood beside it holding a tablet. He looked up as I approached. Ms. Chen? Elise Chen? I nodded, unable to speak. Your vehicle is ready for delivery. If you'll just sign here. Please. As I took the tablet with trembling fingers, the restaurant door opened behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know my family had followed me outside, probably to continue the lecture or perhaps to drag me back inside to avoid making a scene. The delivery specialist handed me the key fob. Sleek, heavy, real. Congratulations, Ms. Chen. She's all yours. I pressed the button, and the Lamborghini's lights flashed once, like a wink. The engine started with a growl that turned heads all along the street. Only then did I turn to face my family. They stood frozen on the restaurant steps, expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to something that looked surprisingly like fear. Elise, my mother began, her voice faint. What have you done? I smiled, a real smile that felt foreign, on my face after the strained evening. I believed in myself, something none of you ever did. The valet approached, eyes wide with excitement. Would you like me to park it for you, ma'am? No, thank you, I replied, opening the scissor door that rose toward the sky like a declaration. I won't be staying. I slid into the driver's seat, the custom leather embracing me like it was made for my body, which it was. The door closed with a solid thunk, sealing me in a cockpit of carbon fiber and cutting-edge technology. Through the windshield, I could see my father's face turning from red to white, my mother's hand clutching her necklace so hard I thought it might break, Vivian's mouth hanging open in a perfect O, and Derek looking at me, really looking at me, for perhaps the first time. I adjusted the mirror, put the car in drive, and pulled away from the curb with a gentle purr that could transform into a roar with the slightest pressure of my foot. In the rearview mirror, my family shrank, becoming smaller and less significant, with each passing second. The city lights streaked past as I navigated toward Lakeshore Drive, where I could properly experience what this machine could do. But it wasn't the horsepower beneath me that made me feel powerful. It was the knowledge that I had finally broken free from the cage of their expectations. My phone began to ring, my mother's name flashing on the dashboard display. I pressed decline and turned up the music instead. Tonight was mine. Tomorrow would be too. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking anyone's permission for either. As I accelerated onto the empty stretch of Lakeshore Drive, the engine's symphony rose around me, and I felt tears streaming down my face, not from sadness, but from a pure, unadulterated joy I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. The Lamborghini responded to my every command, an extension of my will made manifest in Italian engineering and carbon fiber. This wasn't about the car. It never had been. It was about proving, to them and to myself, that my path was valid. That success didn't have to look like law school or medical school or corner offices in downtown high-rises. That sometimes, the black sheep knows exactly where she's going, even when no one else can see the destination. I drove until the tears stopped and laughter took their place. Wild, free laughter that bounced off the leather interior and mingled with the engine's growl. By the time I pulled into the underground garage of my building, I felt reborn. The night doorman's eyes widened as I emerged from the scissor doors. "New car, Miss Chen?" "New everything, Marcus," I replied with a smile. "New everything." In my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and walked directly to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Chicago sprawled before me, a galaxy of lights against the darkness. Somewhere in those lights was the restaurant where my family was probably still sitting, trying to make sense of what had happened. I didn't regret walking out. I didn't regret the car. I didn't even regret the years of dismissal and doubt. Because they had forged in me a determination that no amount of family approval could have created. My phone had accumulated 14 missed calls and 23 text messages by the time I looked at it again. Most from my mother, a few from Vivian, and surprisingly, one from my father. I ignored them all and opened my laptop instead. The dashboard for my app, Creative Fuse, showed the latest metrics from our beta testing. User engagement was up 27% from last week. The waiting list for early access had grown to over 15,000 creative professionals and 2,300 businesses. The launch timeline looked solid. I closed the laptop and walked to my bedroom, where a framed dollar bill hung on the wall, my first payment for freelance design work during college. Next to it was a rejection letter from the prestigious accounting firm my father had insisted I apply to after graduation. I had kept it as a reminder that their path was never going to be mine. Beneath these mementos was a small wooden box my grandmother had given me before she passed. I opened it now, removing the yellowed envelope I'd found hidden in its false bottom years ago. Inside was a faded photograph of my grandmother as a young woman, standing in front of an art gallery. On the back, in her careful handwriting, "My first exhibition, 1962. The grandmother I knew had been a dutiful wife to a successful businessman, never mentioning any artistic aspirations. When I'd asked my mother about the photo, she'd dismissed it as a youthful indulgence before she met your grandfather and grew up. But now I wondered, how many dreams had been buried in our family history? How many passions set aside for practicality? How many authentic selves hidden away in false-bottomed boxes? My phone buzzed again with a text from Vivian. Dad's furious. Mom's in tears. What were you thinking? Call me. I placed the phone face down on my nightstand without replying. Whatever storm was brewing in the Chen family tonight, I wouldn't be taking shelter in their expectations anymore. For the first time, I had built my own roof, strong enough to weather their disapproval. Outside my window, Chicago continued to shine, indifferent to the small dramas playing out within its lights. I thought about my app launching next month, about the years of work finally coming to fruition, about the faces of my family as the Lamborghini pulled away from the curb. It wasn't about the money or even the success. It was about having the courage to be fully, unapologetically myself in a family that had never created space for that. It was about choosing my own definition of value and worth, even when no one around me recognized it. I fell asleep that night with a lightness I hadn't felt in years, as if I'd finally set down a burden I'd been carrying for too long. The burden of trying to earn love that should have been freely given. The burden of contorting myself to fit into spaces too small for my dreams. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would be family fallout to navigate, boundaries to establish, perhaps relationships to rebuild on new foundations, or let go of entirely. But tonight, for the first time, I was exactly where I was supposed to be, driving exactly the life I had chosen. And no one could take the keys from me ever again. The sun streamed through my apartment windows the next morning, casting golden rectangles across the polished concrete floors. I sat cross-legged on my meditation cushion, eyes closed, trying to center myself before checking my phone. The events of last night still felt dreamlike. The dinner, the confrontation, the gleaming Lamborghini waiting for me like a chariot of liberation. When I finally reached for my phone, the notifications had multiplied. 37 missed calls, 52 text messages, 3 voicemails. The Chen family crisis response was in full effect. I opened the first voicemail. My mother's voice, tight with controlled emotion. Elise, this behavior is unacceptable. Your father is beside himself. Call me immediately so we can discuss how to fix this situation. Fix this situation. As if my success was a problem that needed solving. The second voicemail was from Vivian. Okay, I don't know what game you're playing, but it's not funny anymore. Mom barely slept. Dad's talking about cutting you off completely. Not that you seem to need their money anymore. What the hell, Elise? A Lamborghini? Are you having some kind of breakdown? The third voicemail made me sit up straight. It was from my grandmother's sister, Aunt May, the family maverick who had moved to Paris decades ago and only returned for funerals. Elise, it's Aunt May. Your cousin James told me what happened at dinner. Good for you, girl. It's about time someone in this family chose their own path again. Call me when you can. I have some things you should know. I saved her message and deleted the others. Then I did something I'd never done before. I turned off my phone completely and set it aside. Today wasn't about their reactions. Today was about savoring the freedom I'd claimed. My apartment wasn't fancy by Chen family standards, a converted industrial loft in West Loop with exposed brick and ductwork, but it was mine, paid for with my own money. I'd chosen every piece of furniture, every artwork, every plant. Nothing here existed to impress anyone but myself. I made coffee and carried it to my home office, a corner space dominated by 3 large monitors and a whiteboard covered in flowcharts and coding notes. This was where Creative Fuse had been born, line by line of code written late into the night after my day job ended. I opened my laptop and saw an email from Julian Mercer, the lead investor who had championed my app when 6 other venture capital firms had passed. Elise, heard through the grapevine that you're celebrating in style. You deserve it. Latest user testing metrics are incredible. Let's move up the timeline. Lunch today? Jay. I smiled, remembering the first time I'd pitched to Julian's firm. I'd been so nervous I'd forgotten to advance my slides, standing frozen before a room of impassive faces in expensive suits. Julian had walked over, clicked to the next slide for me and whispered, "Just tell us your story. Forget the rest." My story. Not my family's story for me, but my own. I replied to Julian's email confirming lunch, then spent the morning finalizing the user interface improvements our beta testers had suggested. By 11, I was ready for a break. I changed into jeans and a simple black top, grabbed my keys, the Lamborghini key fob still feeling alien in my hand, and headed down to the garage. In daylight, the car was even more spectacular. A masterpiece of engineering and design that made no apologies for its extravagance. Just like I was done making. Apologies for my choices. I drove carefully through downtown Chicago, hyper-aware of the attention the car attracted. At stoplights, people took photos. Pedestrians stopped to stare. A group of teenagers cheered when I accelerated from a green light, the engine's growl echoing between buildings. Julian was waiting at Avec, a sleek restaurant with communal tables and Mediterranean-inspired dishes. His eyes widened as I handed my keys to the valet. "Well," he said with a low whistle, "when you commit, you don't hold back." "Is it too much?" I asked, suddenly uncertain under his appraising gaze. He laughed. "For most people? Absolutely. For the woman who coded an entire platform by herself while working full-time and refused to take no for an answer from 7 VC firms? It's exactly right." He held the restaurant door open. "Success looks different on different people, Elise. You've earned the right to define it for yourself." Over lunch, we discussed moving the launch date up by 3 weeks. User engagement was exceeding all projections, and our wait list was growing exponentially thanks to word of mouth among creative professionals. "By the way," Julian said, pouring more sparkling water into my glass, "I heard from Daniela Gordon yesterday. She wants to feature creative fuse in her Tech Women column." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "Daniela Gordon? From the New York Times?" He nodded, clearly enjoying my shock. Apparently, one of her photographers has been using the beta version and raved about it. She's interested in the story behind it, specifically how a woman with no formal business training developed something the big players missed. "I have a computer science degree," I said automatically, the defensive response so ingrained after years of family dismissal. "I know that," Julian said gently. "And she will too. But that's not the story, Elise. The story is that you saw a need no one else was addressing. You built a bridge between creative talent and businesses that need them but don't know how to find them. You created value where there was friction. That's entrepreneurship at its purest, degree or no degree." His words settled over me like a blessing, dissolving years of doubt seeded by my family's narrow definition of success. Before I could respond, my phone, which I'd reluctantly turned back on for the lunch meeting, lit up with a text notification. "Vivian. Mom and Dad are at your apartment building. Doorman won't let them up. Dad's threatening to call the police. And report your car stolen. This is insane. Call them." I showed Julian the message, my hand shaking slightly. He read it and looked up, his expression serious. "Family complications?" "You could say that," I replied, setting the phone down. "My parents don't believe the car or my success is real, or earned, or sensible." "And what do you believe?" he asked. I considered this, tracing the condensation on my water glass. "I believe I've spent my entire life trying to earn approval that was never going to come, no matter what I achieved. I believe I'm done measuring my worth by their metrics." Julian nodded slowly. "Do you know why I invested in Creative Fuse when the others wouldn't?" "You said it was the market opportunity and execution plan." "That was part of it," he admitted. But mostly, it was the fire in your eyes when everyone else at the table was telling you why it wouldn't work. You didn't argue with them or get defensive. You just said, very quietly, "Watch me." That's rare, Elise. Most people fold when confronted with that much doubt. You alchemized it into determination. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. My parents are at my building right now, probably telling my doorman that I'm having a mental breakdown or that I've gotten myself into some kind of trouble. "And what are you going to do about that?" he asked, not offering advice, just holding space for my decision. I straightened my shoulders. I'm going to finish this excellent lunch with my lead investor. Then I'm going to drive my ridiculously beautiful car back to my apartment and tell my parents exactly once that I'm not discussing my life choices with them anymore. If they can't respect that boundary, I'll have Marcus escort them out. Julian raised his water glass. To boundaries. We clinked glasses, and for the first time, I felt like a peer rather than a supplicant in my own success story. After lunch, Julian walked me to the valet stand. "Remember," he said as we waited for my car, "your background, all of it, including the parts your family doesn't value, is what gives you your unique perspective. Don't let anyone convince you it's a liability." The Lamborghini pulled up, drawing stares from everyone on the street. As I took the keys from the valet, Julian added, "Annalise, the interview with Daniela Gordon is scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. Wear whatever makes you feel powerful." I nodded, suddenly unable to speak around the lump in my throat. This was really happening. Not just the car or the app launch, but a complete rewriting of my narrative. A life defined by my choices, not my family's expectations. The drive back to my apartment was both too short and too long. I rehearsed what I would say to my parents, trying to find words that were firm but not cruel, boundary-setting but not vindictive. By the time I pulled into the garage, I still wasn't sure I had the right combination. Marcus, the doorman, looked relieved when I walked into the lobby. "Ms. Chen, your parents have been waiting for almost 2 hours. They're very persistent." "I'm sorry about that, Marcus. Are they still here?" He nodded toward the seating area where my mother and father sat stiffly on a modern leather couch, looking completely out of place amid the industrial chic aesthetic of my building. My mother was still wearing her designer dress from last night's dinner, as if they'd come directly from the restaurant and been waiting all this time. They stood when they saw me, my father's face darkening with that familiar storm cloud expression. "Elise," my mother began, her voice strained to maintain public composure. "We've been trying to reach you all night and day." "I needed some space," I said simply. I turned my phone off. "Space?" my father repeated incredulously. "You make a scene at a family dinner, drive off in a car that costs more than most. People's homes disappear for hours, and all you can say is you needed space?" I glanced at Marcus, who was pretending not to listen while sorting mail at the front desk. "Let's talk in my apartment," I suggested, leading them to the elevator. The ride up to the 12th floor was silent and tense. My father stared straight. Ahead, jaw clenched. My mother kept shooting me worried glances, as if checking for visible signs of insanity. Inside my apartment, I set my keys and bag on the entryway table and turned to face them. Before I could speak, my father launched in. "Where did you get the money for that car? Are you involved in something illegal? Have you lost your mind?" "Robert," my mother murmured, placing a restraining hand on his arm. "Let's all sit down and discuss this calmly." I didn't move toward the living room. "There's nothing to discuss. I told you last night where the money came from. My app secured first-round funding. The Lamborghini is a personal celebration of years of work finally paying off. No startup. Founder buys a sports car with investor money," my father scoffed. "That's not how funding works, and you know it." "I didn't use investor money," I said evenly. "I used my personal portion from the founder shares valuation. The company is currently valued at just over $90 million. I retain 60% ownership. My mother sank onto a bar stool at my kitchen counter, her face pale. 90 million? That's not possible. Not only is it possible, but it's happening, I replied. I've been working toward this for years, while all of you were dismissing my career as a hobby or a phase. My father paced the length of my windows, looking out at the Chicago skyline, as if searching for signs this was all an elaborate prank. If this is true, and I'm not saying, I believe it is, why didn't you ever tell us about it? The question was so lacking in self-awareness that I almost laughed. When would I have told you, Dad? When you were comparing my salary to Vivian's? When you were suggesting I go back to school for an MBA because my little marketing job wasn't a real career? When you were explaining to your friends that I was finding myself while Vivian was making partner at her firm? My mother looked stricken. We only wanted what was best for you. No, I corrected gently. You wanted what was best for your image of me. You never once asked what I wanted for myself. That's not fair, she protested. We put you through college, supported you, and reminded me of it every chance you got, I finished, as if I owed you the life you wanted me to have in exchange. My father turned from the window, his expression softening slightly. Is that really how you felt? That we were forcing you into a mold? How else was I supposed to feel? Nothing I did was ever good enough unless it fit your narrow definition of success. Do you know how many family dinners I've sat through listening to you praise Vivian's conventional choices while treating mine like disappointing detours? My mother twisted her wedding ring nervously. We were worried about you. The job market is so unstable for creative fields. We didn't want you to struggle. But that was my choice to make, I said firmly. My struggle to face if it came to that. Instead, you made me feel like I was failing when I was actually building something valuable, something that mattered to me. A heavy silence fell. My father moved to the couch and sat down heavily, suddenly looking older than his 65 years. This car, he said finally. It's so flashy. It's not like you, Elise. And there it was, the assumption that he knew who I was better than I knew myself, that any deviation from his perception of me must be inauthentic or misguided. Maybe you don't know what's like me anymore, I suggested. Maybe you never did, because you never really looked. Another silence stretched between us, filled with decades of misunderstanding and missed connections. Finally, my mother spoke. This app of yours, she said cautiously, what exactly does it do again? It was such a small opening, but I took it. For the next 20 minutes, I explained Creative Fuse to them, how it matched creative professionals with businesses needing their specific skills, how it handled contracts and payments, how it protected both parties with escrow services and dispute resolution. My father listened with growing interest, occasionally asking surprisingly insightful questions about scalability and market penetration. My mother seemed more focused on the fact that I had built something tangible, something real. And this is all your idea? She asked. You designed it yourself? Every pixel, I confirmed. I coded the first version alone in this apartment. The expanded development team came later, after the first round of funding. My father shook his head slowly. I had no idea. That's the point, Dad. You never asked. None of you did. He flinched slightly at the truth of it. Then, to my surprise, he stood and walked to the windows again, this time with a different energy, less dismissive, more contemplative. Your grandfather would have understood this better than I do, he said unexpectedly. He was an entrepreneur too, you know, before he built the family business into what it became. This was news to me. What do you mean? My mother shot him a warning look, but he continued. He started with nothing, came to this country with $50 in his pocket and a head full of ideas. Everyone told him he was crazy to open a buy. restaurant when he barely spoke English. But he did it anyway. I moved closer, drawn by this rare glimpse into family history I'd never heard before. What restaurant? Golden Phoenix, on Argyle Street. It's not there anymore. He turned to face me. He worked 18-hour days for years. When it finally became successful, he sold it and used the money to start the import business. Why have I never heard this story? My father's expression clouded. Because it wasn't the part we were supposed to remember. The struggling, the risk-taking. That was just the messy prelude to the real success story. By the time I was born, your grandfather was already established, respectable. That's what he wanted us to aspire to. But he was a founder, I said, slowly. Like me. My father nodded reluctantly. Like you. My mother stood and joined us at the window. Your father's brother, your Uncle Philip, tried something similar when they were younger. He wanted to start a business importing art instead of housewares. Your grandfather refused to fund it. What happened? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Uncle Philip had worked for my grandfather's company all his life, eventually becoming CFO before retiring early due to health issues. He gave up the idea, my father said flatly. Joined the family business instead. It was the sensible choice. The subtext was clear. Sensible choices were the Chen family way. Risky ventures were tolerated only if they succeeded, and even then, the struggle and uncertainty were erased from the narrative afterward. Is that why you reacted so strongly to my app? And the car? Because it reminded you of the path not taken? My father didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked, "May I see it?" The app, I mean. I hesitated, then retrieved my laptop from my office. I opened it to the beta version of Creative Fuse, navigating through the sleek interface I'd labored over for countless hours. My parents gathered around, watching as I demonstrated how a business could post a project, review portfolios of matched creatives, communicate through the platform, and finalize contracts, all within a streamlined workflow designed to eliminate the friction points I'd experienced as a freelancer. This is... My father began, then paused, searching for words. This is impressive, Elise. Truly. Coming from him, it was the equivalent of a standing ovation. I felt a treacherous warmth spread through my chest. That childlike craving. For parental approval I thought I'd outgrown. Thank you, I said simply. My mother touched the screen gently, as if to verify its reality. When you said you were in marketing, we thought... You thought I was just making social media posts and designing flyers? I finished for her. I know. That's what you wanted to think, because it fit your narrative about creative careers being frivolous and limited. She didn't deny it. Instead, she asked, "When does this launch officially?" 3 weeks from now. We've moved the timeline up because of the waitlist demand. My father closed the laptop carefully and handed it back to me. The car is still excessive, he said, but without the previous anger. But I'm beginning to understand why you bought it. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a complete acceptance. But it was an acknowledgement. Perhaps the first real one I'd ever received from him. I should have told you about the app sooner, I conceded. But I needed to prove it to myself first, without your doubts becoming my doubts. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Have we really been so hard on you? The question deserved honesty. Yes, I said gently. You have. All my life I've felt like I was failing some test I never signed up for. Like I was the family disappointment. Because I didn't want the same things Vivian wanted. We never meant to make you feel that way, she said, her voice breaking slightly. We were trying to protect you. From what? From following my passion? From taking risks? From defining success on my own terms? My father sighed heavily. From failing. From struggling. from the uncertainty your grandfather faced before he established himself. He met my eyes directly. It terrified him, those early years. He didn't want any of us to experience that fear. So instead, you passed down different fears, I observed. The fear of deviating from the approved path, the fear of disappointing the family, the fear of being authentic when authenticity doesn't match expectations. Another silence fell, this one less hostile, more thoughtful. My father checked his watch, a nervous habit from decades of tightly scheduled days. "We should go," he said. "You probably have work to do." I nodded, relieved and vaguely disappointed at the same time. Part of me had hoped for a more dramatic resolution. Tearful apologies, profound realizations, the cinematic reconciliation scene where everything is forgiven and understood in an instant. But real healing doesn't work that way. It comes in small moments of truth, in tiny shifts of perspective that eventually add up to transformed relationships. Today was just the first step on a much longer road. I walked them to the door. My mother hesitated, then reached out to touch my face, a gesture so unexpected I almost flinched. "The car really is beautiful," she said softly. "Maybe you could take me for a drive sometime." It was an olive branch, small but genuine. "I'd like that," I replied. My father nodded stiffly, still processing everything that had been said. "We'll talk more about this situation, perhaps after your app launches." "It's not a situation, Dad," I corrected gently. "It's my life, my success, my choices." He absorbed this, then gave a single nod before turning toward the elevator. My mother squeezed my hand once, then followed him. As the elevator doors closed between us, I felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, exhaustion, a tentative hope, and a lingering sadness for all the years we'd spent talking past each other instead of truly communicating. Back in my apartment, I returned to my office and opened my laptop again. An email from Julian confirmed our accelerated timeline. Another from Daniela Gordon requested preliminary information for the interview. A third, from a tech conference in San Francisco, invited me to be a keynote speaker. My new reality was taking shape around me, built on my own foundations rather than my family's blueprints. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't complete, but it was authentically mine. I opened a new document and began typing, the words flowing easily. Now. "Dear Aunt May, thank you for your message. I think it's time I heard those things you said I should know. I'm ready to understand where I come from. All of it, not just the polished version. And I have a story of my own to share with you." The Chen family narrative was being rewritten, one honest conversation at a time. And this time, I was holding the pen. 3 days after the confrontation with my parents, I found myself in a sunlit café in Lincoln Park, sitting across from Aunt May. She'd flown in from Paris the morning after receiving my email, claiming she couldn't miss this moment in Chen family history. At 72, she moved with the energy of someone decades younger, her silver hair cut in a stylish bob that framed a face lined with experience rather than hardened by it. "You look like her," Aunt May said, studying me over her espresso cup. "Your grandmother. Same fire in the eyes." I smiled, uncertain how to respond. In our family, my grandmother had always been described as gentle, accommodating, nothing like the fierce, opinionated woman Aunt May was painting with her words. "That's not how Dad describes her," I said carefully. Aunt May laughed, a rich sound that turned heads in the quiet cafe. "Of course not. By the time Robert was old enough to remember her, your grandmother had already packed away most of herself to fit into the box your grandfather built for her." She reached into her leather satchel and pulled out a weathered manila envelope similar to the one I'd found in my grandmother's keepsake box, but thicker. "She wanted you to have these. Made me promise to give them to you when the time was right." "Me specifically?" I asked, surprised. "How would she know?" She saw it in you from the beginning, Aunt May said simply. The same restlessness, the same refusal to shrink. She worried about what they'd do to you because of it. I took the envelope with trembling hands and opened it carefully. Inside were dozens of sketches, fashion designs, rendered with skill and vision that took my breath away. Among them were newspaper clippings from the 1960s, featuring my grandmother's early work and a photo of her standing proudly before a small atelier in Chicago's Gold Coast. She was a designer, I whispered, running my fingers over the yellowed newsprint. Aunt May nodded. One of the most promising in Chicago, had her own small line, clients from Lake Forest to Hyde Park. Then she met your grandfather and... She trailed off, taking another sip of espresso. And what? And he told her it wasn't respectable enough for the wife of a serious businessman, that no Chen would have a wife who worked in fashion, called it frivolous, feminine nonsense. The words hit like physical blows. How many times had my own creative aspirations been dismissed with similar language? She gave it all up? Just like that? Aunt May's eyes clouded with old grief. Not without a fight, but your grandfather was persuasive. He threatened to cut ties with his family in Taiwan who had helped finance his business. Said they would never accept a designer for a daughter-in-law. She leaned forward. It was different then, Elise. Women had fewer options. By the time I urged her to go back to it, years later, she said she'd forgotten how to dream that big. I shuffled through the sketches, each one more breathtaking than the last. Modern, clean lines with unexpected details. Exactly the aesthetic I'd always been drawn to without knowing why. Did Dad know about this? Robert was told his mother had dabbled in drawing before becoming a proper wife and mother. Your grandfather made sure the real story was buried. I found a photograph I hadn't noticed at first. My grandmother in her 20s, standing before an elegant storefront. The sign above read, Lin Chen Designs in flowing script. She named it after herself, I murmured. She was her work, Aunt May corrected. Just like you are. That's what they never understood. For some of us, our work isn't just what we do. It's who we are. I thought of my long nights coding creative fuse, the way time disappeared when I was deep in the flow of problem-solving and creation. How could I ever have explained that joy to my parents, who saw work as a means to security, rather than an expression of self? There's more, Aunt May said, reaching for the envelope. She extracted a legal document, the type worn thin at the folds from repeated handling. Your grandmother never stopped believing in her vision, even after she stopped pursuing it. She set this up in secret, with my help. I scanned the document, a trust agreement, dated 1978, establishing a creative arts fund in my grandmother's name. The beneficiary line had been amended several times, names crossed out and replaced, but the final name was clear, Elise Chen. This is dated the year I was born, I said, stunned. How did she know? She didn't, not for certain. But she saw something in you even as a baby. A curiosity, a stubbornness. She changed her will when you were 8, after you spent an entire family dinner explaining a story you'd written instead of eating. Your grandfather was furious. Your father was embarrassed. But Lynn, she was radiant with pride. The memory returned in fragments, my elaborate tale about a girl who could talk to buildings, the adults' impatient sighs, my grandmother's hand on mine, urging me to continue despite their dismissal. How much is in this trust? I asked, scanning. For figures. Not as much as your app is worth, Aunt May said with a wink. But enough to have funded your startup without those venture capitalists, had you known about it. The irony wasn't lost on me. Why didn't anyone tell me? Your father was the executor. After your grandmother died, he had control over when and how to distribute it. I suspect he thought he was protecting you, keeping you from choices he considered risky. He had no right to hide this from me, I said, anger rising like a tide. No, Aunt May agreed. He didn't. But Robert has spent his entire life running from the chaos of creativity. Your grandfather made sure of that. She pulled out one final item from her bag, a small leather-bound journal with my grandmother's initials embossed on the cover. Her private thoughts from the years after she closed her business. I think you'll find page 78 particularly interesting. I took the journal reverently, feeling the weight of untold stories in my hands. Thank you for bringing these to me, for telling me the truth. The truth is the least I owe you, she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Lynn would be so proud of you, Elise, not just for your success, but for your courage to live authentically in a family that prizes conformity above all else. We spent another hour talking about Paris, where Aunt May had built her own life as a gallery owner, about my grandmother's designs, decades ahead of their time, about the weight of family expectations and the freedom that comes from setting them down. As we prepared to leave, Aunt May paused, her expression growing serious. There's one more thing you should know. Your grandfather didn't just disapprove of Lynn's career, he actively sabotaged it, called in loans from her suppliers, spread rumors among her clients. When she finally closed her shop, it wasn't entirely by choice. The revelation landed like a blow. Why would he do that to someone he loved? Because control mattered more to him than her happiness, Aunt May said simply. And that, my dear, is the real Chen family legacy you need to break. Not just pursuing your own path, but refusing to let anyone sabotage it, even those who claim to love you. As we embraced on the sidewalk outside, she whispered, "The journal. Read it tonight. There are answers there that will help you understand what comes next." I watched her cab pull away, the manila envelope and journal clutched to my chest like talismans. The café had emptied while we talked, the morning crowd replaced by the lunch rush. I found myself reluctant to go back to my apartment, to the complicated reality waiting there. Instead, I walked to my car, the Lamborghini still drawing stares and photos from passers-by, and drove north along Lakeshore Drive, letting the city fall away behind me. I needed space to process what I'd learned, to understand how it changed the narrative I'd been living within. I ended up at Montrose Harbor, parking in a secluded spot overlooking the water. Chicago's skyline stretched across the horizon, both familiar and suddenly strange, as if I was seeing it through my grandmother's eyes, full of both promise and limitation. Opening her journal with careful fingers, I turned to page 78 as Aunt May had suggested. The entry was dated April 12, 1983, nearly a decade after she'd closed her design business. I saw it again today, that moment when a child's natural creativity collides with our family's expectations. Little Robert was drawing at the kitchen table, creating the most wonderful, imaginative buildings, towers that defied gravity and conventional thinking. Then James walked in and saw the drawings. He didn't yell. He didn't tear them up. He simply said, "Engineers don't waste time on fantasies, son. They build things that stand." And I watched it happen again, that light dimming in a child's eyes as they learn to measure their worth by someone else's ruler. I said nothing, did nothing. My complicity shames me. Will this pattern repeat forever? Will there ever be a Chen who escapes this inheritance of fear disguised as practicality? Tears blurred my vision as I read the words again. This was my father she was describing, a creative child whose imagination had been systematically dismantled in the name of practicality and respectability. How different might he have been without that early conditioning? How different might our relationship have been? I turned the page, finding another entry from a month later. I've made a decision today. I cannot change James or undo what he's done to Robert. But I can create a legacy that might someday offer a different path to a future Chen. I'm establishing a trust, small at first, but it will grow. And I'll wait and watch for the one who shows the same spark I once had, the one who might have the courage I lacked. When I find them, this will be their key to a door I couldn't open. My grandmother had been planning this for decades. A quiet rebellion spanning generations, a buried treasure waiting for the right heir to claim it. Not just financial resources, but permission to break the cycle of creative suppression that had shaped our family for generations. I closed the journal and leaned my head against the car's headrest, letting the magnitude of this revelation wash over me. My success wasn't just my own achievement. It was the fulfillment of my grandmother's thwarted dreams, the redemption of a creative legacy that had been buried but never truly died. My phone buzzed with a text from Julian. Daniela Gordon interview, tomorrow at 2. Still on? I texted back a confirmation, then hesitated before sending another message. Found out something big about family history. Grandmother was a fashion designer forced to give up her business. Changes everything I thought I knew. His reply came quickly. Family legacies are complicated. Doesn't change who you are or what you've built. But maybe explains why building. It mattered so much. He was right. Understanding my grandmother's story didn't diminish my own achievements. It contextualized them, placed them within a larger narrative of struggle and resilience that spanned generations. I started the car and headed back toward the city, a new sense of purpose settling around my shoulders. The Lamborghini was no longer just a symbol of my personal success. It was a declaration that the pattern had been broken, that creativity and authenticity could triumph over fear and control, at least in this branch of the Chen family tree. Back at my apartment, I spread my grandmother's sketches across my dining table, studying each one with newfound appreciation. Her aesthetic sensibility resonated with me deeply. Clean lines with unexpected details, practical yet imaginative, structured yet free. I could see echoes of it in the interface I'd designed for Creative Fuse, though I'd had no conscious knowledge of her work. A notification chimed on my laptop, another email from Vivian. Mom told me about your app. Why didn't you ever say anything? Family dinner next Sunday at their house. Please come. I closed the laptop without replying. The trust document from Aunt May lay beside it. The figures now clear to me. Just over $3 million, accumulated over decades of careful investment. More than enough to have funded Creative Fuse's development without outside investment, had I known about it. I wasn't angry about the money itself. I'd built something valuable without it, proven myself on my own terms. But the withholding of the truth, that cut deep. My father had kept me from both financial resources and, more importantly, the knowledge that someone in my family had blazed this trail before me, had valued creativity enough to protect and nurture it across generations. That night, I sat cross-legged on my meditation cushion with my grandmother's journal open before me, reading entry after entry. Her hopes, her regrets, her quiet acts of resistance within a marriage and family structure that sought to contain her. In her words, I found not just explanation but guidance for the path ahead. The greatest act of courage, she wrote in one of her final entries, is not to fight against those who would diminish you, but to create so boldly and beautifully that their limitations become irrelevant. Success is the sweetest revenge, but freedom is the greatest victory. The next morning, I dressed carefully for my interview with Daniela Gordon. Black trousers, a structured blazer in deep emerald, and beneath it, a vintage silk blouse I'd found years ago at a secondhand shop. It wasn't until I looked in the mirror that I realized why I'd been drawn to that particular blouse. Its mandarin collar and subtle asymmetric closure echoed designs in my grandmother's sketches. I was carrying her with me, consciously or not. The New York Times interview was set to take place at Creative Fuse's new office space, a converted loft in Fulton Market that we'd just leased in anticipation of our growing team. It was still mostly empty, awaiting furniture delivery and equipment setup, but its soaring windows and raw industrial beauty made it the perfect backdrop for the story Daniela wanted to tell. She arrived precisely at 2 p.m., a tall woman with a direct gaze and an economy of movement that suggested she didn't waste time on pretense. The photographer accompanying her immediately began assessing light angles and background options, while Daniela and I settled into the 2 chairs we'd arranged near the windows. "So," she began without preamble, "you've built something that's got the entire creative freelance community buzzing. Tell me why it needed to exist." I appreciated her directness. Because talent shouldn't be invisible, and businesses shouldn't have to hunt for it. The old system was broken. Creative professionals spending more time pitching than creating. Businesses hiring based on who they knew rather than who was best for the job. Creative Fuse fixes that disconnect. She nodded, making a quick note. "And you built this alone initially?" "From concept through beta. I brought on a development team after securing funding, but the core architecture and design are mine." "That's unusual in tech. Most founders come with co-founders, technical partners. Why solo?" I considered how much of my personal story to share. Daniela Gordon wasn't writing a family drama. She was covering a business innovation. But the two were inextricably linked in ways I was only beginning to understand. "I didn't start out planning to do it alone," I admitted. "But when I talked about my idea, most people didn't get it. They saw obstacles instead of possibilities. Eventually, I stopped talking and started building." "And now those same people want in," she observed with a knowing smile. "Some of them. Others are still skeptical. That's fine. Being underestimated. Create space to exceed expectations." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "That's an interesting perspective. Most founders I interview are desperate to be taken seriously from day one. I spent most of my life trying to be taken seriously by people with limited vision," I said, thinking of the family dinners, the dismissive comments, the constant comparison to more conventional paths. Eventually, I realized their approval wasn't actually the goal. "What was the goal then?" I gestured around the empty office space with its potential humming in the air. "This. Building something meaningful. Solving a real problem. Creating value that didn't exist before." Daniela leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. "Let's back up. How did you identify this particular problem worth solving?" For the next hour, I walked her through the evolution of Creative Fuse. From my early experiences as a freelance designer struggling to find consistent work, through the complex process of developing an algorithm that could match creative talent, to business needs based on more than just keywords and portfolios, to the current state of the platform with its thousands of waitlisted users eager for access. Throughout, she asked incisive questions that suggested she'd done her homework. About our revenue model, our approach to dispute resolution, our plans for scaling across different creative disciplines. But she also probed the human elements of the story. The personal drive behind the platform, the challenges of being a solo female founder in a tech landscape still dominated by men, the moments of doubt and breakthrough that had shaped the journey. "I have to ask about the car," she said eventually, setting down her notebook. "The Lamborghini. It's become something of a talking point in tech circles. Some are calling it flashy, others see it as a power move. What's the real story there?" I smiled, recognizing the question for what it was, a test of my self-awareness and authenticity. "The real story is that I spent years being told my ideas weren't practical, my vision wasn't realistic, my path wasn't secure. The car is admittedly symbolic. It's me finally giving myself permission to take up space, to be seen, to celebrate what I've built without apology." "Some would call that validation-seeking behavior," she noted, though her tone wasn't judgmental. "Maybe," I acknowledged, "but there's a difference between seeking validation and claiming recognition. One is about pleading for others to see your worth. The other is about refusing to let them ignore it." She held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded as if I'd passed some private test. One last question. What would you tell other creators who feel invisible or undervalued in their current environments? I thought about my grandmother's journal, about her thwarted dreams and quiet resilience, about the trust she'd established to give a future generation what she'd been denied, about my own journey from seeking approval to creating value on my own terms. I'd tell them that being underestimated is sometimes a gift, I said slowly. It creates space to build something extraordinary while no one is watching too closely. I'd tell them that the people who dismiss your vision often lack imagination, not because your vision is flawed, but because their perspective is limited. And most importantly, I'd tell them that validation from those who never believed in you is overrated. The real victory isn't proving them wrong, it's making their opinion irrelevant to your success. Daniela clicked off her recorder, a genuine smile spreading across her face. That's the headline, she said with satisfaction. Right there. After the interview, the photographer spent another hour capturing images, me at the empty desk that would soon be mine, standing at the windows, overlooking the city beside the Lamborghini in the parking garage below. Throughout, I felt a strange sense of completion, as if I was fulfilling not just my own narrative, but one that had begun decades earlier with a young designer who had been forced to close her shop, but never truly abandoned her creative identity. That evening, as the sunset painted Chicago's skyline in gold and rose, I sat at my dining table with my grandmother's sketches spread before me and made a decision. Opening my laptop, I began a new project, separate from Creative Fuse but aligned with its mission. A digital archive of Lin Chen's designs, paired with her journal entries and the story of how her creative legacy had survived despite attempts to suppress it. I worked through the night, scanning sketches, transcribing journal entries, creating a visual timeline of her work and its interrupted evolution. By morning, I had the framework of something that felt important, not just as family history, but as a testament to the persistence of creative identity across generations. As dawn broke over the city, I finally closed my laptop and moved to the windows, watching Chicago awaken beneath me. In 3 weeks, Creative Fuse would launch publicly. The New York Times article would run. My family would have to reconcile their image of me with the reality of what I'd built. And I would step fully into a role that my grandmother had envisioned, decades before I was born, the Chen who broke the pattern, who chose authentic expression over fearful conformity. My phone buzzed with a text from Julian. Board meeting at 10. Ready to finalize launch timeline? I texted back, ready. And I have a new project to discuss, a nonprofit initiative honoring overlooked creative legacies, starting with my grandmother's. His reply came quickly. Intrigued. Tell me more when you get here. I smiled, feeling the pieces of my life aligning in ways I couldn't have imagined just a week ago. The Lamborghini key fob sat on my entry table, no longer just a symbol of personal vindication but a connection to something larger. A creative inheritance finally claimed, a legacy of suppressed talent finally finding expression. As I prepared for the day ahead, I remembered my grandmother's words. Success is the sweetest revenge, but freedom is the greatest victory. In honoring her designs and story, I was claiming both. The success she'd been denied, and the freedom she'd fought for in quiet, persistent ways. The truth of our family history had been revealed, not as a weapon to wield against those who had hidden it, but as a foundation to build upon, a context that gave deeper meaning to my own journey of creative resilience. I picked up my keys and headed for the door, ready to merge my grandmother's unfinished story with my own unfolding one. 2 generations of Chen women refusing to be diminished, creating boldly despite attempts to contain them, ultimately finding freedom through the very creativity others had dismissed as impractical or frivolous. Outside, Chicago waited, not just as a backdrop for my success, but as the same city where, decades earlier, a young designer named Lin Chen had opened a shop and dared to put her name above the door. I would drive through those same streets. Today, carrying her designs in my bag and her determination in my spirit, completing a circle that had remained open for far too long. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, where Marcus greeted me with his usual cheerful nod. "Big day, Ms. Chen?" I smiled, feeling the weight of history and possibility balanced perfectly in that moment. Every day is big from here on out, Marcus. Every single one. Launch day arrived with the kind of perfect Chicago autumn morning. That seemed designed for new beginnings. Crisp air, cloudless sky, sunlight catching on glass and steel as the city shimmered with possibility. I stood at my apartment windows, watching dawn break over the skyline, trying to absorb the magnitude of what today represented. In 3 hours, Creative Fuse would go live to the public. Our servers were ready for the influx of users we anticipated, based on waitlist numbers and pre-launch buzz. The team, now 27 people strong, would gather at our Fulton Market offices for the official launch event. Press had been invited. Industry analysts were standing by. Julian had arranged for a champagne toast at noon, when we'd ceremonially flip the switch together. My phone had been buzzing steadily since 5 a.m. with good luck messages and final check-ins from the development team. But there was one notification I kept returning to, a simple text from my father sent late last night. "We'll be watching the live stream. Proud of you." 5 words that would have meant everything to me a month ago. Now they landed differently, welcome but no longer necessary for my sense of validation. His approval was a gift, not a requirement. That distinction made all the difference. I dressed with care in a custom-tailored pantsuit of deep teal, my grandmother's favorite color, according to Aunt May. Beneath it, I wore another vintage blouse I'd sourced after seeing similar designs in Lynn's sketches. Around my neck hung a simple gold pendant Aunt May had brought me, a small pair of scissors that had been my grandmother's lucky charm during her design days. The Lamborghini purred to life as I headed toward the office, but today it felt less like a statement and more like a companion, a tangible reminder of the distance I'd traveled from that restaurant rejection to this moment of culmination. The car turned heads as always, but I no longer felt self-conscious under the attention. Some dreams deserve to be visible. The office was already humming with activity when I arrived. Engineers were making final system checks. The PR team was coordinating with media, and the customer support squad was preparing for the flood of new users and inevitable questions. Julian stood at the center of it all, calm and confident, directing traffic with the practiced ease of someone who had launched companies before. He spotted me and broke into a wide smile. "There she is, the visionary herself." I returned his smile, feeling a surge of gratitude for his early belief in me and Creative Fuse. Without his backing, I might still be coding alone in my apartment, my grandmother's legacy still hidden, my family's patterns still unbroken. "Everything ready?" I asked, accepting the coffee he handed me. "Systems are green across the board. Media is in place. Your New York Times feature just went live online and it's already trending on Twitter." He showed me his phone screen, where Daniela Gordon's article was prominently displayed with the headline, "The Invisible Made Visible: How Elise Chen is Revolutionizing Creative Work." Beneath was a striking photo of me standing at the office windows, city spread out behind me, looking not just confident, but powerful. The woman in that image was someone even I was still getting to know. A leader, a founder, a vision carrier, unbound by others' expectations. "Daniela did an incredible job," Julian said, scrolling through the article. "She really captured the why behind Creative Fuse, not just the what. That's rare in tech coverage." I skimmed the piece, catching phrases that made my heart swell. A platform born from personal experience with invisibility. Chen didn't just identify a market opportunity. She solved a problem she lived, and most strikingly, in a family. That prized conventional success, Chen found the courage to define achievement on her own terms, creating space for other creatives to do the same. At the end was a quote from me that I didn't fully remember giving. Sometimes rejection is just redirection to a path that's uniquely yours. The people who can't see your vision aren't your audience anyway. Did I actually say that? I asked. Julian, pointing to the quote. He laughed. Word for word, you were on fire that day. He squeezed my shoulder gently. The team wants to see you before the press arrives. They've got something for you. He led me to the main workspace where all 27 team members were gathered in a loose circle. They broke into applause. When they saw me, faces bright with excitement and pride. Many of them had taken significant career risks to join a startup, believing in Creative Fuse's mission and potential, even before we had proper funding or office space. Speech, called Mira, our lead UX designer who had left a prestigious agency to join us. I hadn't prepared anything formal, but standing before these brilliant people who had committed their talents to bringing my vision to life, words came easily. A month ago, I began, I was sitting alone in my apartment, working on this platform with no certainty it would ever reach the people who needed it. Today, we're about to open the doors to thousands of creative professionals who have been waiting for exactly what we've built together. I looked around at their faces, diverse in background, experience, and expertise, united by belief in our mission. But this isn't just about launching a successful tech platform, it's about something deeper. Each of you joined Creative Fuse because you understand that creative work has been undervalued for too long. That talent deserves to be seen, compensated fairly, and connected with opportunities worthy of it. Nods and murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Many of you took risks to be here, left secure jobs, turned down other offers, bet on a vision that existed mostly in wireframes and pitch decks. Today isn't just my validation. It's yours. We did this together, and what we've built will change countless creative careers for the better. I hadn't noticed Julian slipping away during my impromptu speech, but now he returned carrying something, covered with a cloth. The team parted to make way for him. Before we go live, he said, the team wanted to present you with something to mark this occasion. He set the covered object on a desk and stepped back. I approached cautiously, curious, and touched by the gesture. When I lifted the cloth, I found a beautifully framed collection, my grandmother's original fashion sketch on one side, and on the other, the first wireframe I'd ever drawn of Creative Fuse's interface. Between them was a simple inscription on handmade paper. From Lin Chen to Elise Chen, the legacy continues. My hand flew to my mouth as emotion overwhelmed me. How did you... Aunt May helped, admitted Zoe from the marketing team. We wanted something that honored not just where Creative Fuse is going, but where it came from, the creative lineage that made it possible. I traced the frame with trembling fingers, taking in the striking similarity between my grandmother's clean, innovative design aesthetic and my own approach to the platform's interface. The connection was unmistakable. A visual language passed down without direct teaching, an inherited eye for how form should serve function while still maintaining beauty. This is, I began, but words failed me. Thank you, all of you. Julian checked his watch. Press arrives in 30 minutes, launch in 90. Everyone ready to make history? The energy in the room crackled with anticipation as the team dispersed to their stations, making final preparations for the moment we'd all been working toward. I took the framed piece to my office, placing it on the desk where I could see it. Throughout the day, a reminder of both how far I'd come and the shoulders I stood upon. At 11:30, the press began arriving. Technology reporters from major publications, local Chicago media, industry analysts, and a film crew from a streaming service working on a documentary about women in tech. They gathered in our main space, which had been transformed with creative lighting and comfortable seating areas for the event. I spotted my mother first, her elegant figure unmistakable even across a crowded room. She stood near the entrance, scanning the space with apprehensive curiosity. Beside her was my father, looking simultaneously out of place and determined to belong. Vivian and Derek hovered behind them, Vivian's expression a complex mix of surprise and something that might have been respect. They had come. Despite everything, the restaurant confrontation, the revelations about my grandmother, the years of dismissal and doubt, they had come to witness this moment. I made my way through the crowd toward them, accepting congratulations and fielding brief questions as I moved. When I reached my family, there was a moment of awkward hesitation before my mother stepped forward and embraced me. "This is remarkable, Elise," she said, gesturing around at the bustling office. "All of this from your idea." My father extended his hand formally, then seemed to think better of it and pulled me into a stiff but sincere hug. The Times article was illuminating, he said. "I had no idea how much work you've put into this." "Because you never asked," I replied, but without bitterness. It was simply a fact we both needed to acknowledge. He nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. "I'm asking now." Before I could respond, Julian appeared at my elbow. "T-minus 15 minutes, Elise. The livestream viewers are already up to 5,000 and climbing." I introduced him to my family, watching with quiet amusement as my father shifted into business mode, asking Julian detailed questions about funding rounds and valuation metrics. Some habits didn't change overnight. "We should find our seats," my mother suggested, always mindful of propriety. "We don't want to distract you from your big moment." As they moved toward the audience area, Vivian hung back, fidgeting with her purse strap in a rare display of uncertainty. "I read grandmother's journal," she said abruptly. "Mom showed it to me after everything came out. I had no idea." I waited, giving her space to continue. "I've been thinking about when we were kids," she said, her voice softer than I could remember hearing it in years. "How you were always drawing or writing stories or making things, and how everyone acted like it was cute but not serious. Not like my math competitions or debate team wins." "It's how families work sometimes," I said. "We get assigned roles early." She nodded. "The responsible one and the creative one, the practical one and the dreamer." Her gaze swept across the office, taking in the energy and purpose humming through the space. "But it turns out the dreamer was building something real all along." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, perhaps the most honest conversation we'd had as adults. "We should talk more," I offered. "After today. Really talk, not just family small talk." "I'd like that," she said, surprising me with her sincerity. Then, with a ghost of her usual competitive spirit, she added, "Though I still think the Lamborghini was excessive." I laughed. "Not excessive. Strategic. Now you'll never forget the day I drove away from that restaurant." A smile tugged at her lips. As if anyone could forget that exit. It was cinematically perfect. Julian appeared again, this time with unmistakable urgency. "Elise, we're ready. 2 minutes to live stream." With a quick squeeze of Vivian's hand, I followed him to the front of the room where a simple podium had been set up beside a large monitor displaying the Creative Fuse landing page. A countdown clock ticked in the corner. 1:45, 1:44, 1:43. The room quieted as Julian stepped up to introduce me, his voice carrying through the space and out to the thousands watching the live stream. 3 years ago, he began, a young woman walked into our venture capital firm with an idea that had been rejected by 6 other firms before us. She didn't have the typical founder profile. She didn't come from a business background. What she had was something more valuable: direct experience with the problem she was solving and the technical skills to build the solution herself. The countdown reached 1 minute as he continued. "Today, Creative Fuse launches as one of the most anticipated platforms in the creative economy space, with over 20,000 professionals and 3,000 businesses waiting to gain access. But beyond the impressive metrics and market opportunity, what makes this moment special is the vision behind it. a vision of a world where creative talent is visible, valued, and connected to meaningful work. 30 seconds. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the founder and CEO of Creative Fuse, the visionary who coded the first version alone at her kitchen table and built both a platform and a community that will change how creative work happens, Elise Chen. Applause filled the room as I stepped up to the podium, my heart racing but my voice steady. I looked out at the gathered faces, press, team members, investors, and my family, all waiting to witness the culmination of years of unseen work. Thank you all for being here today, I began. Creative Fuse was born from a simple observation. The world is full of incredible creative talent that remains invisible to those who need it most. Designers, writers, photographers, illustrators, videographers, all with unique skills and perspectives, all struggling to be seen in a marketplace that wasn't built for them. The countdown reached 10 seconds. Our mission is to make the invisible visible, to create pathways between talent and opportunity that didn't exist before, to ensure that creative work is valued not just with praise, but with fair compensation and respect. 5 seconds. This platform isn't just about efficient matching or secure payments, though it does those things exceptionally well. It's about dignity. It's about recognition. It's about ensuring that no creative person ever again has to hear that their work, their vision, or their contribution is somehow less valuable than conventional paths. The countdown hit 0. And with that, I'm honored to declare Creative Fuse officially open to the world. I pressed the ceremonial button on the podium, and the monitor behind me transformed from the landing page to the live platform, user numbers already ticking up as people gained access. Applause erupted, champagne corks popped, and the room filled with the energy of collective achievement. In that moment of celebration, I caught sight of my father's face in the crowd. He was watching the monitor with an expression I'd never seen before, a mix of wonder and what might have been regret. Beside him, my mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Vivian stood straighter, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. And in the back of the room, Aunt May raised her champagne glass in a private toast, her eyes shining with tears and triumph. The press converged after my speech, cameras flashing, questions overlapping. I answered each one with a clarity and confidence that felt both new and completely natural, no longer seeking validation, but simply sharing the vision that had driven me for years. Ms. Chen, called a reporter from a major tech blog, now that Creative Fuse has launched successfully, what's next for you personally? I smiled, thinking of the digital archive of my grandmother's designs I'd begun working on, the nonprofit initiative to support creative legacy projects, the conversations with my family that were only beginning. Next is honoring the path that made this possible, I replied. Creative Fuse isn't just my vision. It's built on a legacy of creative resilience that spans generations. My grandmother was a fashion designer who had to abandon her career due to family pressure. Part of my mission now is ensuring that other creative legacies aren't lost or suppressed. The reporter looked intrigued. So this is about more than just a tech platform for you? It always has been, I said simply. Creative Fuse is a tool for visibility, but it's also a statement that creative work matters, that innovative thinking shouldn't be marginalized, and that sometimes the most valuable contributions come from those who've been told their vision doesn't fit conventional expectations. Another reporter jumped in. The Lamborghini that's been making headlines, was that a deliberate statement as well? I laughed, no longer defensive about this symbol I'd chosen. The car represents something important, the freedom to define success on your own terms, to take up space unapologetically, to celebrate achievements that others might not understand or validate. But the real achievement isn't the car. It's the platform we're launching today and the thousands of creative careers it will elevate. The questions continued for another 30 minutes before Julian gently intervened, reminding everyone that We had a platform to monitor and users to support on this critical first day. As the press began to disperse, I found myself face to face with my father again. "There's something I need to show you," he said, his usual authoritative tone softened by what seemed like nervousness. "When you have a moment." Curious, I followed him to a quiet corner of the office. He reached into his suit jacket and withdrew a folded piece of paper that looked worn at the creases, as if it had been opened and refolded many times. "I found this after our confrontation at your apartment," he said, handing it to me. "It was in a box of your grandfather's papers I kept after he died." I unfolded it carefully, not sure what to expect. It was a letter, dated 1964, written in my grandfather's precise handwriting. "My dearest Lynn, I write this knowing I may never find the courage to give it to you. Today I asked you to close your design studio, to give up the work that brings such light to your eyes. I told myself it was for your own good, for the family's stability, for our future together. But the truth shames me. It is fear that drives me, fear that your success might outshine mine, that your independence might mean you need me less, that the community might respect your creativity more than my practicality. In asking you to diminish yourself, I reveal my own smallness. If you are reading this, it means I found the courage to confess this weakness, to tell you that I was wrong, that your talent deserves to flourish, not wither in the shadow of my insecurity. With deepest regret and endless love, James." I looked up at my father, questions spinning through my mind. He never gave this to her? My father shook his head. It was sealed when I found it. He wrote it but couldn't bring himself to admit his mistake. "And you've been carrying it around since our argument?" He nodded, looking suddenly older and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. "I recognized myself in his words," he said quietly. "The fear that your choices somehow invalidated mine. The need to control what I couldn't understand." I refolded the letter carefully, feeling its weight in my hands. Not just paper, but the burden of intergenerational patterns, of fears passed down like heirlooms, of truths left unspoken until they calcified into family mythology. "Thank you for showing me this," I said. "It helps me understand." "I'm trying to do better than he did," my father said, his voice rough with emotion. "To not leave important things unsaid." He gestured around at the bustling office. "What you've built here, it's extraordinary, Elise. Not despite taking a different path, but because of it. I see that now. It wasn't a complete transformation. Decades of ingrained patterns don't dissolve in an instant. But it was a beginning, an opening, a crack in the foundation of misunderstanding that had shaped our relationship for so long. I'd like to understand more about what you do," he continued, "how this platform works, the problem it solves. If you have time, perhaps you could explain it to me. Really explain it, not just the summary version." "I'd like that," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. Before we could say more, Julian approached with news of our first 1,000 users successfully onboarded. My father nodded in understanding and stepped back, allowing me to return to the operational demands of launch day. But something had shifted. Between us, a new respect, a tentative bridge across the chasm of differing values and visions. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity, troubleshooting minor issues, celebrating milestones as user numbers climbed, conducting interviews, and guiding my team through the controlled chaos of a major product launch. By evening, we had successfully onboarded over 15,000 users, received coverage in every major tech publication, and begun trending on multiple social platforms. As the office finally quieted, most of the team having departed for a well-deserved celebration at a nearby restaurant, I found myself alone at my desk, the framed pairing of my grandmother's sketch and my first wireframe before me. I traced the lines with my finger, seeing clearly now the through line of creative inheritance that connected us across generations. My phone buzzed with a text from Julian. joining us for the celebration dinner. The team is waiting for their visionary leader. I smiled, appreciating his gentle nudge, but needing a moment more with my thoughts. On my way, I replied, just finishing something important. I opened my laptop and navigated to the digital archive I'd begun building of my grandmother's designs. Adding a new section, I uploaded a scan of my grandfather's unsent letter, alongside a photo of Creative Fuse's launch day. Below, I typed a simple caption. Some legacies aren't about what we inherit, but what we reclaim. Some successes aren't measured by who finally sees our value, but by how clearly we see it ourselves. And sometimes, the most powerful act isn't proving others wrong, but creating something so right that their validation becomes unnecessary. I closed the laptop, picked up my keys, both the office set and the Lamborghini fob, and took one last look around the space where a vision had transformed into reality. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new milestones, new opportunities to define success on my own terms. But tonight was for celebrating how far we'd already come. Not just the platform launch, but the personal journey from invisibility to unapologetic presence. As I stepped into the elevator, I thought about the contrast between that night at the restaurant, the dismissal, the judgment, the narrow definitions of value and worth, and today's launch, with its celebration of creative contribution and authentic vision. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Rejected from one table, I had built my own, large enough to welcome thousands of others who had similarly been overlooked or underestimated. Outside, the Lamborghini waited in the parking garage, no longer just a symbol of rebellion or vindication, but a reminder that some journeys require us to travel at our own speed, in vehicles of our own choosing, toward destinations others might not yet be able to see. I started the engine, feeling its vibration resonate through me like a promise kept. To myself, to my grandmother, to every creative person who had ever been told their vision wasn't practical or their contribution wasn't valuable. The car pulled smoothly onto the street, its headlights illuminating the path forward into a Chicago evening glittering with possibility. Behind me lay the weight of expectations I'd finally set down. Ahead stretched a future I was authoring on my own terms. And in this moment, driving between past and future, I felt something I recognized from my grandmother's journal entries. Not just success or vindication, but the pure, uncompromised joy of creative freedom finally claimed. It had never been about the car. It had never even been about proving my family wrong. It had always been about becoming fully, unapologetically, myself and creating space for others to do the same. As I accelerated toward the restaurant where my team waited to celebrate our collective achievement, I smiled at the realization that had been forming all day. In the end, the greatest legacy isn't what we inherit or what we build, but what we liberate in ourselves and in others. And that liberation, once achieved, can never be taken away. Not by rejection, not by doubt, not by narrow definitions of success, not by generations of fear disguised as practicality. That's what my Lamborghini really symbolized as it glided through the Chicago night. Not just wealth or achievement, but the freedom to define your own path, to create your own measure of success, to drive away from limitation toward the vast, open road of possibility that belongs to those brave enough to claim it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.